right, I've just gotten the thumbs up from upstairs. That means the live stream is up and running, or at least that's what we believe to be the case, as much as one can know these things. So welcome everyone to Bible class this morning, whether you're among those who are have very responsibly seated yourselves in a physically distant manner. I commend you. This is the fourth week now, and people seem to be catching on to the system quite well. So good to have you here. If you're in the church this morning, there is a new study sheet available for you. We're still not finished the first one, but both the sheets are available on the little table just partway down the aisle by the short pews. And if you're online, the material is available for today's class on the church website. And I'm not sure whether last week's is still available, but you can certainly follow along with today's notes as well. So, and now where might you find those if you're just tuning in and you have no clue about our church website? Holy Cross Kitchener, oops, so don't get to the funny stuff too fast here. What's going, oh, come on, no, you're wrecking this all up here. My pen seems to not be working these days. There we go. So there's the church website, and as we so often do, if there are any questions, just shoot me an email during the class. Don't put questions up in any of the dialogue on screen because I can't see that. I don't have access to that, so I'll be blissfully ignorant of your question, which is sometimes a good way to be. But these are my email is available for you. All right. Now, as we often do here, a few little funnies to start the week here. We are not here in Canada the most powerful nation on the earth. We understand that quite well, but one day, the entire world will adapt to our rather strange practice of apologizing to everybody for just about anything, whether we did anything wrong or not. You know, we're just sorry. You know, I'm sorry. You know, anyway. All right. Now, this is a bit historic, but I had never seen this before until one day this past week. What you're going to see next is a headline from the Toronto Star, and maybe this is an old joke to you, but I just about lost it when I saw this. I think somebody in the editorial department was having a little too much fun that day, or maybe had even, had a puff or two before it was legal. But that's the kind of reporting we need today. All right. And then this was sent to me yesterday. I was commenting or editorializing on the ubiquitousness, the everywhereness of the pumpkin spice season, like everything now, from the middle of August till peppermint comes at Christmas time. It's all about pumpkin spice, and just the new purchase when you come to the Lord's Supper this morning, we're ready for you. No, that's a meme. That's not. You cannot actually buy that product, but it's funny nonetheless. Given the goofiness that exists in the church today on some things, particularly around communion, wouldn't shock me in the least. Anyway, now one of the things that we don't disclose any too early here at Holy Cross are some of the things that are going to happen in the service. But I've decided that from now, for a little while at least anyway, I'm going to take some time each Sunday to reveal who next week's anthem singers will be. You ready for this? And I've found some really good anthem singers for us here at Holy Cross. Oh my, huh? Just like, the Will Simmons Singers. There you go. With Divine Disco. We don't have the praise singers right now, so we have to do our best, I don't know whether they still have that hair or not, but anyway. I thought you'd laugh louder at that because I just thought that was utterly... I've got more. There's more where that came from, believe you me. All right, let's get on to the subject at hand, Elijah and Elisha, and more particularly, the whole business of being faithful to God in very unfaithful times. We took a kind of a quick look last week, and we're just going to really just glance over it again this week, just to kind of remind ourselves, not that we need a whole lot of reminding, of the world that we live in. That, fully half of the Canadian population are either agnostic, they don't know about God, outright atheists, there is no God, or simply unreligious. And only about 10% of Canadians attend weekly church services anymore. As I said last week, and a number of you nodded, you were probably the only car pulling out of your neighborhood off of your street this morning to come to church. It's just not something that's generally done. So what's taking its place? Well, spirituality, believe it or not, is as alive and well as it has ever been. What's changed is that people no longer participate in religion or in church because they believe it to be an authentic, authoritative core of revealed truth, and that you adapt your life to that truth. The whole question today of is there any such thing as truth? And is there anyone who can say they've got it right, or that this is the only way to everlasting life? I mean, that will get a firestorm started, over coffee amongst a group of people very, very quickly, and you'll hear most all of them say no. And a lot of people with maybe axes to grind, and some of them even justifiable axes to grind at the church, will particularly say no. And what's taking its place, and this is, among the young folk today and young adults as well, is a quest for personal authenticity. Be really you, who you really are. To some degree, again, this is not a bad thing. Everybody's different, and God created each one unique and different. And yes, we are to be who we really are. But when we put ourselves at the center, then the expectation is that faith, religion, will adapt itself to you. And so, kind of a complete reversal. And this is something that's very, very much at home in Canada, maybe more so than for our friends south of the border, because we live in a very socially liberal culture here in Canada. We're very, very focused here on Canada on equality and rights, which is, again, nothing wrong with any of that. These are important things. But this has really changed the identity of our country in the last 20 and I would say maybe 30 years, going back into the late 1900s, somewhere around 1990, I think some of this really, really began to change. And as I said, no shortage of spirituality, however. Today, when I grew up in Edmonton, one of the interesting things about growing up in Edmonton was that it was the only city in Canada at the time that had a mosque. The only city in Canada that had a mosque, a very small one. And we as a youth group our pastor took us to the mosque so that we could understand this small little minority of people in our community who referred to themselves as Muslims. And it was quite a fascinating trip. I remember going there, and we were quite taken with the similarities and the differences and things like that. But now, I mean, there's mosques in many, many, many cities, as well as temples for Hindu, Sikh, and other faiths that have come to our shores, perhaps mostly through immigration than anything else. Indigenous spirituality is on the rise again, and a recognition of indigenous spirituality. Just this past week, of course, with the Day for Truth and Reconciliation, a lot of that was wrapped up in indigenous spirituality. And, many people are attracted to that. And, such a thing now as blended faith, where people kind of pick from the smorgasbord, if you will, of things that are out there to believe and kind of make up their own sort of thing. It kind of caught up with the whole idea that what's really important is finding my truth. And then humanism. Even those who say that there is no God are, whether they want to understand themselves this way or not, they are people of faith as well. Because where their belief is most often rooted is in humanity. I believe in humanity. I believe that humanity can do better. I believe, these kinds of things. And so that too becomes a kind of spirituality, though your average humanist might be a little loath to kind of be tagged that way. It is in its own way a faith. And so we find ourselves today very much in a world like the world of the New Testament, and as we're focusing on here, the world even of the Old Testament, where there was no shortage of spirituality, but a definite shortage of people claiming to follow the God of the Bible, the Trinity, Yahweh, and the truth that is contained there. And we covered this briefly last week. I'm just not going to read the whole passage to you, but we remember here that Ahab has now become the king of the northern nation of Israel. He's going to reign for a good long time for a king in those days, 22 years. And he continues to foster the pagan agenda, particularly here through his wife, Jezebel, and he builds an altar for Baal and a temple for Baal, and he also constructs Asherah poles and does a lot, more than anybody before him, to anger the Lord. All right, I'm just going to check quickly for questions. Nothing there. Any questions from the floor? I see a hand at the back. Oleg, yes, speak nice and loud.
Yeah, the previous slide where you listed all of these religions and stuff, I think there's like maybe a new one that appeared in the last few years that maybe fits in the last two. It's like, I think something like wokeness.
Oh, yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, okay. Yeah, maybe as a subset of humanism, the whole idea of being woke, which I mean, again, not that there's anything wrong with being, woke in the sense of being aware of things that are going on and how other people are perceiving the world and things like that. Christians, we're going to hear about this in the sermon this morning. We're to love our neighbor with all our, with all we got, which means kind of being awake to their needs. But this has become, yes, absolutely. Yeah, this has become, a kind of a subset of the humanism, I would say anyway. I'm not woke enough to know. But I'm trying to be aware anyway, yeah. Okay, any other comments, observations? Mabel is, hand up, speak nice and loud, even maybe slip down your mask a little bit so I can hear you.
Well, the issue with the environment.
Oh yeah, the environment. We talked about that last time too. Yes, this whole sense that, that, again, Christians should be at the forefront of being environmental. I mean, we know God gave us this world, and we know God gave us this world to take care of it and manage it properly, not to abuse it. But yes, now the pendulum has in some ways swung right through that this is really all about worshiping the creation. That the creation itself is sacred, and again, that gets a little slippery. Yes, again, Mabel.
Well, there's even a party called Animal Protection now.
Oh yeah, the Animal Protection Party. Yes, the Animal Protection Party. Yeah, with I think 1 or 2 candidates across the country, including one here in Kitchener. Yes. Not, please. Maybe I just won't say it. I won't say it. I'll just get in trouble for saying things. All right. Just leave it. Leave it, Pastor. Move on. Next slide. All right. Now, just to talk, I mean, in some ways, just to segue from environmentalism and wokeism and things like this into today's world, in the Old Testament world, these concerns were foremost in people's minds too. Thus, the whole arising of the Baal worship. Baal is an environmental god, if you will. He is the rainmaker. He is the guy who brings about the proper seasons and the fruitfulness of the earth. And so, a kind of almost a similar thing, although you don't find people today, worshiping statues. Although this is really sad. This happened a couple of years ago before COVID in some ways brought us all back to our senses again a little bit. There's a very liberal seminary in New York in the United States where just before COVID hit, they had a service, whether they're daily chapel services, and up at the front of the chapel or the middle of the chapel, I'm not sure how that chapel is configured, they set up plants, all kinds of plants. And the people who came to chapel that morning confessed their sins to the plants. I kid you not, it really happened. I mean, it's just dumbfounding. Anyway, but this is this is more or less the ancient culture, and Ahab and Jezebel, they support this. They bring in 450 Baal prophets, imports, immigrants, so to speak, to come in and develop this cult within the country. And then also, I didn't share this last time, Asherah. Who's Asherah? She's another fertility god. This is the female fertility god. If you have a male god, which is Baal, in their thinking you need to have a female as well. And she's thought to be the mother of all the living. This is one of the only safe for work pictures of Asherah I could find yesterday. There are many Asherah statues that would be not safe for work, to use that internet jargon. Anyway. And then she's worshipped by Asherah poles. And if you need to have a little discussion, want me to talk about that, you can visit with me privately. We'll discuss that. But it shouldn't be too big a leap to get what's behind that. And then they also imported 400 of those prophets into the country as well. So this whole business of the fertility of the land and worshiping these gods that are really kind of expressions of human need. We need the land to be fertile. We need the rain to come. In that culture, they needed it particularly. They were agricultural people, and they are they needed this, and so it's not hard to see how something like this could arise, and could also be fairly popular. And it's into this world that Elijah steps. Now, we talked very briefly about him last week. I don't want to go on too much here. James has a question right in the front.
Were those two gods fostered from Canaanites?
The question is, where did these gods come from? Did they come from the Canaanites? These two gods particularly come from the Phoenicians, which is more up into what's now today Lebanon. That is where the Baal cults really had their roots, although there are some connections to the Canaanites as well. But this is really something that comes in from the north and down into Israel and ultimately into Judah as well. Yep. So into this world comes Elijah, a virtual unknown on the spiritual scene. He's not the son of a prophet, as far as we know. He's not from the priestly families. He's not from the upper class of religious life or political life. From a little out of the way place called Tishbe, and we talked about this yesterday or last week rather. Tishbe is just on the east side of the Jordan River here. He goes to Samaria, which is where King Ahab has his palace, and then out to the brook. And now we will actually get into the scriptural account itself and just read the opening encounter here. And this is on last week's lesson sheet if you have that handy. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." God is going, the real God, the living God, is going to show Ahab, whether he wants to learn it or not, just who it is that controls the rain. And Ahab is perhaps going to be surprised to learn that it is not the little statue, and it is not the whole cult of fertility that has come from Phoenicia, but the real God. And it's unstated in the text, but we know from what happens next that that's exactly what happens. A drought comes. And this causes a problem for Ahab. Whether he wants to admit it or not is another thing. Because Israel was always a country where the king was seen as the spiritual father of the nation. And with his loyalty to Baal, he had brought in that perspective to life. And he's the one who's responsible for religious life. He is the representative of the deity, of the God. And so he's the one that people are looking to on a day-to-day basis, so to speak, to ensure that everything goes okay. He's responsible in that, he's the one ultimately responsible for keeping the God happy. And the God he's brought in is Baal. And so he's the one and his wife, they're the ones who are responsible for keeping Baal happy. It's sort of like today we look to our leaders to be sure the economy is functioning properly. And that's where the Israelites, they looked to Ahab. And all of a sudden, Ahab is going to end up being not so powerful. And I think what happens in this very early part of the story actually has its effect on Ahab throughout his life. Because what he becomes as his story unfolds, not only is he one of the most wicked kings in the sense of his loyalty to other gods, his tolerance for unscriptural things happening in his land, we're also going to see he's one of the weakest kings that God's people ever had. And I think it's in part because early on in his time, he has shown right clearly that what he has brought in, the faith that he has tried to bring to the people, is really nothing more than just an outward veneer, that there is no substance, there is no truth to it. Okay? And we know that already, and Elijah knows that as well, because the Lord makes it abundantly clear that he makes springs pour water into the ravines. It flows between the mountains. They give water to the beasts of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. The birds of the sky nest by the waters. They sing among the branches. He waters, God waters, the mountains from his upper chambers. The land is satisfied by the fruit of his work. And the true God, the God of the Scriptures, is always a God of abundance. Sometimes in our humanity, we cultivate a theology of scarcity, that there isn't going to be enough to go around. But that's just patently wrong. God talks about there being abundance of everything, and that in him our needs are all satisfied, whether we want to see that or not, and that where there is genuine scarcity in the world, the resources are there to help. We don't always get around to doing that. I see a hand in the back. Joe, just speak up nice and loud so I can hear you.
Okay. I'll take the grenade on this one.
Okay.
This shows that the prophets, as you were saying, had a very important role in addressing the economics as well as the spirituality of the people. And we have in our circles, especially since the presidency of, it started with the Tea Party movement, really, is that there has been a strong stream towards libertarianism. And that stream of libertarianism has also been very strong among our own numbers. Like I know fellow Christians in fellow congregations that swallow all of this Tea Party movement thinking about scarcity, where they basically say, oh, the world isn't perfect, let free markets rule, and everything is going to sort itself out. Well, the prophets don't talk like that at all. They talk about oppression, they talk about violence, and they talk about defending the widow and the orphan all the time. So you'll see this when Elijah speaks, you'll see this when Elisha speaks, and in all the prophetic writings. And in this case, you're going to see this. You're going to see this at work when Elijah confronts these false gods too.
Yep. Yeah, for those who couldn't hear online, Joe, and I'm going to tie this back even to something that we said earlier. You know, there are ditches to the left and ditches to the right. You know, if certain things kind of tend to be more on the left, center-left side of the political spectrum, there are humanity issues that fall more to the right side of the spectrum too. And we have seen in our time, you know, and it's certainly been fueled in our through the COVID pandemic, you know, this whole insistence on my rights. It's my right, you know, to do this. And it's often wrapped up in religious talk, as if the U.S. Constitution and to some degree the Canadian Constitution are some sort of biblical document or something like that. But this whole notion of our rights, the Bible doesn't really talk too much about your rights. You can't, you know, if you were to do a Bible study on your rights, uh, it'd be mighty thin. Because even though you've got rights, we all have basic human rights, the Bible talks a lot more about a collective view, a holistic view of society, where not only you have rights, and most of your rights are actually spiritual rights, they're not physical rights. Jesus, Paul doesn't, go to the slaves and say, hey, you have the right to freedom and freedom of work and freedom of association, so, out you go, protest and you'll be set free. He doesn't do that. They're to remain in their stations. Christians aren't to be known as people who are out there, disrupting society over things. And what's emphasized more is our responsibility. Oops, I suddenly learned I didn't know how to spell responsibility. Not that my writing really matters, but anyway, responsibility. Yeah, we have responsibility. That's more the emphasis of the Scriptures. And again, you'll hear that in the gospel reading this morning. What's the second great commandment? Love your neighbor as yourself. Yes, yourself is important, but your neighbor is just as important as you are. All right, sorry, that gets off the treading thin here. All right, skating on thinner ice. Well, I'm not. I'm skating on thick ice. I know what I'm saying. All right. Okay, Elijah. Back to Elijah again here. Okay, so Ahab's got a problem on his hands. And we just kind of are left there. What for his part, what's going to happen to Elijah is he's going to go to a little bit of seminary training now here. He's had his first foray into the big wide world of profiting. And for various reasons, including the preservation of his existence, he needs to get out of there. And so he takes off from Samaria, where he had met the king, out to the east again across the Jordan to the brook of Kerith. And the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there. So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. This is God caring for him, God teaching him where the sustenance is going to come from. Drought comes on the land. Yet, Elijah is fed every day. He's sustained every day so that he can continue his work as the prophet. And it's that same provision. Now here, I've gone more to the spiritual side here, but I could have just as easily gone to the physical side, where we too, getting back to this whole idea of abundance versus scarcity. The Lord is abundant. We're going to celebrate that next week on Thanksgiving with our physical blessings, the things we need to live each day. But even more, He is abundant with the things that we need in our spiritual lives. For example, 1 Corinthians 11, what I received from the Lord I passed on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night that He was betrayed, took bread, and when He had given thanks, broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, He took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until He comes." God's still feeding, still providing, still doing it in a supernatural way. Not in a way that so much fills our stomachs, but in a way that fills our spirits and sustains us. Just as Elijah was sustained by the bread and the meat. And He calls us. This is more stuff that was meant to be the wind down of last week, but we'll cover it anyway. He calls us to flee from idolatry. I speak to sensible people. Judge yourselves for what I say. Is not the cup of thanksgiving for which we give thanks a participation in the blood of Christ? And is not the bread that we break a participation in the body of Christ? Because there is one loaf, we who are many are one body, for we share one loaf. The thing that struck me about this passage as I prepared actually for last week's class is I'd never seen before how close this whole statement about communion, which is a verse that we trot out with the confirmation class, and you know, when we want to talk about what communion really is, that it's not just a symbol of the body of Christ, and it's not just a symbol of the blood of Christ, but an actual communion, an actual sharing in the body and the blood of Christ. It had never struck me until just last week as to how closely that is tied up, you know, to the whole subject of idolatry. And, you know, we often talk about communion being a confession of our faith and of our unity in the faith. And part of that is that we're setting aside, when we come to the Lord's table, we're to be setting aside the idols of the world, the things that so easily get their way into our hearts and take the chief place in our hearts. I'll probably mention this again in the sermon, so you can sleep at this point in the sermon. But I was listening to a podcast a while back from a very scholarly, conservative Christian leader who was talking about the whole subject of idolatry. And he said, if you want a window into the idols in your own life, you may go, what idols do I have? Well, idols are those things that want to push God off to the side. He said, ponder what it is that you think about when you get those rare moments where somebody isn't demanding something of you, you're not at work, you know, when you just get those moments of free time. Where does your mind go? And, you know, for many of us, it goes to, you know, family, it goes to, you know, our hobbies or our other interests or, you know, whatever. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of that. But I think he's rather insightful when he says that these things that your mind goes to in those times are probably the things that you would most easily make into an idol in your life. Make into something that is the most important thing for you. You know, I mean, on one hand, you know, and I thought about that for myself. I went, yeah, okay, yeah. When, you know, when I get those rare moments where I can just sit, feet up, nothing else going on, where does my mind go? And a lot of times, yeah, I could go to things that could quite easily slide into the middle of my life and be the thing around which everything else has to take its place. And you know, just an insight. He said, you know, he says nothing. You know, there's nothing wrong with thinking about those things. Don't get me wrong here. Nothing wrong with thinking about those things. But you know, it's just a little an insight into, you know, the window of your soul as to where it would go had God not intervened in your life and brought you to Him. And so, in a certain sense, we are fleeing from idolatry. And when we come to the Lord's table and saying, no, you know, really, you know, forgive me for that, and renew a new and right spirit within me by providing for me. Any questions or observations? Checking the phone. James.
Well, I think at that point, especially, it's what I would refer to as the socially acceptable idols, like sports,
right, yeah. You make a valid and wise point. Not all idols are ridiculous and way out to lunch. There are a lot of socially acceptable idols. Things like work. Things like what was another one you just sports? Yeah, sports. Yes. And our recreation, our free time, our fun time. Yeah, there are a lot of socially acceptable idols that we can be susceptible to as well. Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Oh my, I'm getting. I think on one track, and now I've got several things going at once here. That's never good for me. All right, but we are reminded, because of God's great love, we are not consumed. His compassions never fail. They're new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion. I'll wait for him. And from him, we receive everything we need. On the last and greatest day of the festival, Jesus stood and said in a loud voice, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me," as the Scriptures said, "rivers of living water will flow from within them." And by this he meant the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were later to receive. Up until this time, the Spirit had not been given, at least not in the formal Pentecost kind of way, since Jesus had not yet been glorified. All right, that gets us through the first session. Any comments, questions, just as we've sort of laid the groundwork here? Yes, they're coming up everywhere. Chris?
Well, it's part of the whole idea of when things are going well and we're prosperous, we tend to turn to God less than when we're desperate for something that's a crisis, and the way has been cleared because we're so focused on something that's important. And together with that, even our leaders who may not be spiritual in any other times when there's a crisis that we really have no control over, you'll hear our thoughts and prayers are with you, even when there may never be a prayer that things are going well.
All right. No, exactly right. Yes, the Chris, for those who couldn't hear online, Chris brings up that there's the whole, when things are going well in our lives, we're nowhere near as intense in our spirituality as we become when the chips are down. Then the leaders, everybody's talking about our thoughts and prayers. Well, yes, prayer is God is equally eager to hear your prayers on the best day of your life as he is on the worst day. We're not always quite as thoughtful about that. Exactly. Mabel, was it your hand I saw next? Yes.
I was just thinking of the Pharisees.
Yeah.
You know how Jesus kind of stole them because they were all about these rules?
Yeah.
So sometimes we got to be careful. Sometimes we think it's a religious thing we're doing, but maybe it's an idol. Or you know how we get obsessed with following?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, yes. Yes, our traditions, our rules. Yeah, that these things too become an idol. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Been to enough church meetings where the idol of tradition was right up there at the front, Whoops, what did I do? Whoops, I shut my computer off. Whoops. There was something. No chain is stronger than the weakest link, and it's me. Well, anyway, we might have just gone away from. Yeah, well, we're done on that front. I hit the wrong button. Yeah. So nothing more. Let's see if it'll come back quick here. Our own rules. Yeah, absolutely. You bet. Okay. Well, if we can stand 5 minutes without the PowerPoint, I think we'll be okay. We move forward in the story to Elijah and the widow of Zarephath. And now, even for Elijah, he's cared for by the ravens and watched over. But even there, it's not for forever. The brook dries up. And he's got to do something, and God guides him here a little bit. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. because, of course, Baal isn't really in charge of these things. After all, it's the Lord. And the word of the Lord came to him, "Go at once to Zarephath of Sidon and stay there. I have commanded a widow in that place to supply you with food." So he went to Zarephath, and when he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called her and asked, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink?" As she was going to get it, he called, "Bring me, please, a piece of bread." "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take it home and make a meal for myself, that we may eat it and die." Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first make a small cake of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. For this is what the Lord God of Israel says: the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord gives rain in the land." And she went away and did as Elijah told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry. We just heard that reading a few weeks ago here in church, and we also heard what follows that reading. That was just a couple of weeks ago, where the son of this woman passes away. And Elijah the woman is justifiably broken and angry about that. And Elijah then takes the boy upstairs, and the boy's life is restored. What we're going to see as we move forward into the rest of chapter 17, which we won't get time to do, obviously, today, is that God reveals himself to be the true God by doing some things that are not ordinary projections or ordinary things that a human being would or could do. First of all, he's going to show himself to be the God of the outsider. Most of our, left to ourselves, most of our spirituality tends to be very selfish. It's all about me and what's good for me. God is going to open Elijah's mind and our minds to see that, no, he is the God of the outsider. This woman from Zarephath is a pagan, and he's going to welcome her in and bring her to faith. He's also going to show himself to be the living God. Most of our gods that we create are all gods that we agree with. We don't have to argue with them very much because we agree with them, and they agree with us. But God is going to do something very, very disagreeable, and he's going to show that he is a living God, a sovereign God, if you will. And then he's going to show us something else that no other idol, no other God can ever do for you, and that is he's going to be a stretched out God and raise the boy again to life. So we're pretty much out of time for today. That's really just the outline of where we're going. And we will pick it up with, if you've got a session 2 sheet, as I say, we barely scratched the surface of that. Keep it with you. We'll have a few more copies next week. But this is where we're going to look next time. The true God, who is the God of the outsider, the living, sovereign God, and the life-giving God. Let's pray. Forgive us, Lord, when idols become our focus too. Teach us to be faithful, even though many around us are not. Remind us of your great love for us, the truth you speak into our hearts, that in the midst of a time that is very spiritual, but also very confused, we might shine the real light of your love and grace and forgiveness through us into the world around us. Bless us now as we prepare our hearts to worship, or if we are on our way from here, having worshiped already, guide us in the rest of the things that we do this day, that it would all be for your glory and for the good of those around us. We ask it in Jesus' most holy name. Amen. All right. As we have become accustomed to doing here, we're going to ask everybody to exit. I think I see somebody in the back with a squirt bottle in their hand. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I see squirt bottles. They're going to come in and squirt the pews and give them a quick wash, and then we will be ready for the next service.